You noted in that piece, interestingly, you stated the radicalization of the middle classes, and that's something that I've also been noticing. And at least you said a temporary attachment to the IUSF, knowingly, unknowingly. If I may just quote a piece from that, I strongly believe, I quote, I strongly believe that the future of this country depends on a definite tilt to the left, if not the centre left. It also depends on active engagement with Parliament. This is why Kumar Gunaratnam's call to go beyond the legislative process smacks of the same mistakes made by Rajapaksa. It assumes the will of the people without bothering to assess it. If the IUSF and the FSP are serious about bringing socialism to Sri Lanka, it should confront these mistakes, stop flirting with the upper middle classes, and start a serious debate on the future of this country. So I wanted to ask how you saw the IUSF and whether you feel there's a genuine sort of tilt towards the left, and how you base that on.
Well, firstly, Kusum, my take on that is that what we are seeing right now, I mean with a deteriorating economic condition and so on and so forth, what we are seeing right now is a section of Sri Lanka's predominantly Sinhalese and predominantly Buddhist middle classes being radicalized. So earlier they had the luxury of taking sides. They could side with either side of the ideological line as far as Sri Lankan politics is concerned. But right now they have become so disenchanted with conventional establishment politics that they have definitively tilted towards the very same formations and the very same alliances which they overwhelmingly used to ridicule and criticize those days. Because I remember back then when the IUSF and the FSP, when those activists were tear gassed and baton charged, these were the same people who were out there cheering the police. But now they have actually turned towards them. A very good example I can think of is one of the very first things that Gotabaya Rajapaksa did when he became president was to demarcate a special protest zone in Galle Face. Now I saw the comments back then. People were overwhelmingly, even those who had not voted for Rajapaksa, they were overwhelmingly for that. And I also remember Dr. Harini Amarasuriya very clearly in an interview with, I think, Economy Next, stating, I mean, this is not how dissent is tolerated, not how dissent is encouraged in countries, in democracies. You don't just demarcate protest zones like that and expect everyone to go there and shout and scream and go back to their homes as if nothing had happened. What's interesting is that the very same people who actually welcome these developments, they were the very first people to actually feel betrayed by the Rajapaksa government and to actually start siding with these radical elements, predominantly the youth, because they are always, I mean, they are always ripe for conversion, right? They are always ripe for conversion. So whether or not they consciously feel that they are tilting towards socialism or towards a left, center left political formation, I would say more on an emotional rather than intellectual plane, right. They feel sympathetic towards the IUSF. So, I mean, the IUSF just made use of that opportunity. You can't blame them. They were playing a very pragmatic game, and they actually played that game really well, because many of their slogans like increase social welfare, I mean, improve social services, I mean, things that are along the redistribution line. I mean, they are distributionists at heart. They want more public spending on health and education. These things resonate with a middle class that feels increasingly cut off from the state because their economic condition has, I mean, the middle class is all but completely wiped off right now because of price hikes and all that. So there was a sort of conjunction between these two developments. On the one hand, the middle class going into near extinction in Sri Lanka, and on the other hand, the IUSF taking the upper hand in the protest. So these two developments came together really beautifully. However, I would like to add this caveat. I don't know whether that means that these middle class elements, whether they really feel ready for a socialist transformation in this country. I don't know whether they are socialists, I don't know whether they are center leftists, but I do know is that on an emotional rather than an intellectual plane, they feel at home with the IUSF FSP crowd.
How do you view the recent polls that came out? I think Dr. Ravi Rananellia has written extensively. His organization, the Institute for Policy Health, Institute for Health Policy, was the one that published these results. It showed what we expected, in that the support for the Pohottuwa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa has collapsed. But the other side of the coin is that the main opposition, SJP, has been unable to sort of take advantage of this. But it shows that the AKD, NPP, JVP faction has taken advantage of this. Now, when I put it to Dr. Ravi Rannan earlier that we generally see an uptick in the polling, but then we end up, when it comes to elections, the electorate doesn't really side with the leftists. Maybe there's a culture of Sri Lankan culture against leftism because of the JVP insurrections, etc., especially in the urban areas. Mm-hmm. How do you see the urban areas specifically? And do you think Dr. Ravi Rannan's polling might actually translate into votes?
Well, Dr. Ravi's poll, in my opinion, Dr. Ravi's poll accurately sums up the zeitgeist, so to speak.
Exactly, right.
Because right now people are increasingly siding with, there's a reason why they are siding with AKD. Not merely because they are fed up and disgusted by the SLPP, but also because they feel that the SJP is not living up to its name as the main opposition. So, and also AKD, Anurakumar Dissanayake and his troop, they have been very, one of their biggest strengths has been their ability to unveil corruption. I mean, the recent episode where they, at a press conference, they just released file after file documenting corruption in this government. That was really well taken by the public. Even those who earlier used to criticize and lambast them. But you're right, there is a disconnect between these polls. I mean, when you click on your candidate of choice, you're always moved by the moment. You think of all the things that, you know, motivate you to vote, and then you click that button. But then when you are at an election voting booth several days before elections, I mean right before you enter the polling booth, those old tendencies, I mean it's not peculiar to Sri Lanka. We tend to vote for the mainstream.
Right.
I mean, if you look at, there was a lot of hype over personalities like Ralph Nader and Bernie Sanders, but what happened to them in the end? So
even Lieberman. Yeah,
even Lieberman. I mean, they promised to actually go out of the conventional line, and there was a big wave around them and over them. But come election day or come nomination day, they were swept away. This is not peculiar to Sri Lanka. It's there in the US, it's there in the UK, and so on and so forth. But it's tragic because the way I see it, the JVP has never been fully given a chance to prove its worth. Right. They were coalition partners, very short-lived government under Chandrika Kumaratunga.
About 1 year, I think.
For about 1 year. And I have talked with people in the south of Sri Lanka, which is technically Rajapaksa heartland, who speak favourably of Mr. Dissanayake, because if I am not mistaken, he was agriculture minister at the time. So I was in Kataragama and they were speaking very favourably of how, I don't know whether this is true, this is what they told me, that when he was agriculture minister, he ensured that, you know, the water was there. Even during times of drought, water would be there. He, how should I put it, he remolded and reconstructed and rebuilt the canals and so on and so forth. I don't know whether he really did that, but that is their perception of him in the south. So it's really tragic that there's this disconnect, but it goes back to my earlier point. The middle classes, particularly even in the suburban areas, they feel sympathetic towards Anurakumar Dissanayake on an emotional plane. But on an intellectual plane, when it comes to actually voting for them, would they really exercise their choices? Would they place a primacy on their heart rather than their head? I don't know.